Imagine standing before the sacred Ark of the Covenant, which represented the presence of God among his people. Now, think about what you would do if you saw it about to fall. Would you act impulsively to protect it? That is exactly what Uzzah did. He reached out his hand to steady the Ark of the Covenant and died immediately upon touching it. This story, recorded in the Bible, is one of the most intriguing and impactful accounts in the Old Testament. But why did God allow Uzzah to die for something that, from a human perspective, seemed like an act of zeal and care? Was this divine punishment disproportionate? Or is there something deeper behind this event? Get ready to discover who Uzzah was, the context of his actions, and most importantly, why he died upon touching the Ark of the Covenant. His story teaches us about the holiness of God and how we should approach what is sacred. Uzzah was a man who had the honor of living with the Ark of the Lord in his family during the Old Testament. He was the son of Abinadab, who housed the Ark of the Covenant in his home after the Philistines suffered great calamities for capturing it. However, Uzzah's story ended tragically when he touched the Ark in an improper manner. What makes this story so striking is that God punished him immediately. For many people, it is difficult to understand why God took such a severe action, but it is important to remember that God is the creator of life. He has the power to give and take it according to his will, without needing to justify his actions. This does not mean that God is unjust or cruel. In fact, Uzzah's story teaches us about the holiness and justice of God, which are in perfect harmony with his mercy and goodness. One attribute does not cancel the other. All are part of God's character. Even so, many people wonder, was God too severe in punishing Uzzah simply for touching the ark to keep it from falling? Was it truly such a serious error? Furthermore, why did Uzzah die when he touched the ark, while the Philistines, who also touched it before him, were not immediately struck down according to the Bible? If you have ever had doubts about this story, watch this video to the end, because you will understand who Uzzah was, what happened to him, and most importantly, why God punished him so severely. As mentioned, Uzzah was the son of Abinadab, a man who had the honor of housing the Ark of the Covenant in his home after the Philistines suffered severe calamities for capturing it. According to the biblical text, Uzzah had two brothers, Eleazar and Ahio. Eleazar was appointed to care for the ark when it arrived at Abinadab's house. Ahio, on the other hand, was present during the tragic moment when Uzzah lost his life. Some scholars suggest that Uzzah and Ahio may not have been direct sons of Abinadab, but possibly grandchildren or other descendants of his lineage. This is due to the difficulty in precisely determining family ties in some biblical narratives. However, what we know for sure is that Uzzah and Ahio belonged to the house of Abinadab, and as members of this family, had close knowledge of the ark and its spiritual significance. To understand Uzzah's story, we need to go back in time, before the period of the prophet Samuel. The Bible tells us that on one occasion, when the Israelites were defeated by the Philistines, the priests Hophni and Phinehas, sons of the high priest Eli, lost their lives, and the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines. The Philistines took the ark to their cities, but ended up facing severe punishments sent by God. Frightened by the calamities that struck them, they decided to return it to the Israelites. Thus, the ark was taken to Kiriath Jearim, where the men of the region placed it in the house of Abinadab. To care for it, they appointed Eleazar, son of Abinadab, as responsible for its safekeeping. After many years in Abinadab's house, David, now king of Israel, decided to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, making the city the religious center of God's people. However, the transportation of the ark did not go as planned and ended in tragedy. The Bible recounts that the ark was placed on a new cart pulled by oxen, and Uzzah and Ahio were tasked with guiding it. At first, there was joy. A large caravan accompanied the ark with celebrations and praises to the Lord. But as they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled or moved abruptly, causing the ark to sway as if it were about to fall. Quickly and impulsively, Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. This provoked God's anger, and as the Bible recounts, Uzzah was struck down and died right there beside the Ark of the Covenant. Because of this episode, the place became known as Perez Uzzah, which means the moment when God's wrath was unleashed against Uzzah. This event deeply shook King David, leaving him fearful of God. He decided to halt the transport of the ark to Jerusalem. Instead, the ark was taken to the house of a man named Obed-Edom, where it remained for 3 months. Here arises an important question. Why did Uzzah die upon touching the Ark of the Covenant? The biblical text in 2 Samuel chapters 6 and 7 explains that God considered Uzzah's act a sign of disrespect. After so many years of living with the ark in his house, Uzzah acted without reverence, forgetting that it symbolized God's presence among his people. Furthermore, the ark was being transported incorrectly, disobeying the instructions given by God. According to the law, only the Levites were allowed to carry it using specific poles. Placing it on a new cart, although seemingly more practical, disrespected the divine guidelines regarding the care of this sacred object. In the book of Numbers, chapter 4, God established clear and specific instructions for transporting the Ark of the Covenant, emphasizing the importance of His holiness and the respect owed to His presence. He decreed that only the Kohathites, a family from the tribe of the Levites, were permitted to carry the Ark. Even they, who were entrusted with its transport, were not allowed to touch the Ark directly under penalty of death, as outlined in the law. To ensure that His command was obeyed, God instructed that special poles be inserted into the rings of the ark so it could be carried on the shoulders reverently, without direct contact. This practice reflected not just logistical care, but also a profound acknowledgement of God's holiness, which could not be treated casually or irreverently. However, in the incident described in 2 Samuel chapter 6, this command was completely disregarded. The ark was placed on an ox cart, a method of transportation not only contrary to divine instructions, but also reminiscent of the behavior of the Philistines, who had captured and transported it in the same manner. For the Philistines, a pagan people unfamiliar with God's laws, this method was understandable. But for the people of Israel, who had a covenant with God and were familiar with His instructions, this represented a serious negligence and lack of respect. This event shows that, at that moment, God's people treated the ark, which symbolized His presence, in a way similar to how pagan nations treated it. They not only ignored God's instructions, but also demonstrated an excessive familiarity with something extremely sacred. The transportation of the ark ceased to be an act of obedience and reverence, becoming instead a matter of convenience and practicality. Even so, many people still wonder why Uzzah died upon touching the ark, while the Philistines, who had captured it earlier, were not immediately punished. The answer lies in the relationship each had with God. The Philistines were not part of the covenant people. They had not received God's instructions nor understood the holiness of the ark. While they erred in capturing and transporting it, God dealt with them differently, allowing them to be afflicted by plagues and judgments during the time the ark remained in their territory. 1 Samuel chapter 5. These calamities served as a testimony to God's power among the pagan nations, making it clear that His presence could not be treated irreverently. On the other hand, Uzzah was part of God's people and, as such, had the duty to know and obey His laws. He grew up in an environment where the ark was present, as it remained in his family's house for years. This means that Uzzah not only knew God's instructions, but also had the responsibility to respect them. By reaching out to touch the ark, even with the intention of preventing it from falling, he directly disrespected the divine command that no one should touch it. His action was not just an instinctive reflex, but also a demonstration of a lack of reverence and obedience. This episode reveals that God expects more from his people precisely because he has given them the privilege of knowing his instructions and walking in covenant with him. Uzzah's death was a severe judgment, but also a clear warning to Israel and to all future generations. God's holiness cannot be treated lightly. While the Philistines were punished with plagues out of ignorance, Uzzah was judged for knowingly disobeying God's commands, reminding us that those who know God's will bear greater responsibility before him. Most scholars believe that Uzzah's family belonged to the tribe of Levi, more specifically to the Kohathites, who had the God-assigned responsibility of carrying the sacred objects of the tabernacle, including the ark. This assumption is based on the tradition that the ark was to be under the care of the Levites, as commanded in the law of Moses. If this interpretation is correct, it means that Uzzah was likely well aware of the detailed instructions regarding how the ark was to be handled and transported. When the time came to bring the ark to Jerusalem, the city David planned to transform into the spiritual and political center of Israel, there was a great celebration. The goal was to honor God's presence and mark a new chapter in the history of the people of Israel. However, those responsible for the transport ignored the clear instructions given by God regarding how to handle the Ark of the Covenant. According to the law, it was to be carried on the shoulders of Levites from the Kohathite family using specially designed poles. Instead, they decided to place it on a new cart pulled by oxen, perhaps thinking this was a more practical and modern method. This disregard for divine instructions revealed an attitude of carelessness and lack of reverence for sacred things. The punishment that fell upon Uzzah when he tried to steady the ark as it wobbled was a clear and impactful warning to all who witnessed the event. God was teaching his people that his holiness cannot be treated negligently. This act had a profound pedagogical character. It showed Israel that good intentions alone are not enough when approaching the things of God. Obedience and respect for his word are essential. The event also highlighted the seriousness of the ark's role as a symbol of the divine presence among the people. It was not just any object, but the representation of the throne of God on earth. Uzzah's death left a profound and unforgettable message. Approaching God is a privilege that requires reverence, care, and above all, submission to his commands. God is holy, just, and perfect, and his instructions are neither optional nor negotiable. They reflect his divine nature and the respect he deserves. When Uzzah touched the Ark of the Covenant, he disregarded the holiness of God, and his reckless action resulted in a clear demonstration that the Lord does not accept being treated casually or disrespectfully. This event was not merely a judgment, but also a powerful teaching moment for the people of Israel. The Ark of the Covenant symbolized God's presence among his people, something so sacred that it required the utmost care and reverence. When Uzzah reached out to steady it, even if seemingly instinctive, he violated an important principle. Obeying God's commands is more important than acting according to human logic. God had already given clear instructions on how the ark should be transported, but at that moment, those instructions were ignored, revealing a spirit of disobedience and lack of fear. For us today, Uzzah's episode offers a very relevant lesson. The things of God cannot be treated carelessly. Often, we may be tempted to act with negligence or irreverence regarding what is sacred, whether in our prayer life, in reading the Word, or even in serving God's work. We can become so accustomed to God's blessings and presence in our lives that we risk treating them carelessly, forgetting that He is a holy God, worthy of all respect and obedience. Furthermore, this story teaches us a fundamental lesson. Good intentions alone are not enough when it comes to obeying God. Even though Uzzah may have had the impulse to protect the Ark of the Covenant, his actions revealed a crucial flaw. He ignored God's specific instructions regarding how the Ark should be handled. This reminds us that obedience to God is not secondary, but central. God does not seek merely well-intentioned gestures or actions. He desires that we live according to His will, demonstrating our respect and submission to His authority. This lesson is especially relevant in a world that places such high value on intentions and feelings. Often, we are tempted to justify our actions based on what we think is right or what we feel is correct. However, Uzzah's story shows us that our thoughts and feelings cannot replace God's clear commandments. God does not change, and His principles remain the same, regardless of the circumstances. God's standard is complete obedience, not merely a partial effort or something adapted to our preferences. Uzzah's death also serves as a powerful warning to recognize the holiness of God. In the days of Israel, the Ark of the Covenant was the most evident symbol of the divine presence among the people. It was an object that embodied the representation of God's glory and holiness, and therefore had to be treated with utmost care and reverence. This principle remains true today. God is holy and worthy of all honor, and we cannot approach Him carelessly or irreverently. Therefore, this story challenges us to reflect on how we have treated God's will in our lives. Are we acting according to His commandments, or are we simply following what we find more convenient? Are we offering Him the respect and obedience He deserves, or are we approaching Him negligently? Uzzah's death was not just an isolated judgment, but a lesson for all generations about the importance of reverencing God in everything we do. To honor Him means not just having good intentions, but aligning our actions, words, and thoughts with His will, recognizing that He is holy, just, and worthy of all worship. We must handle everything related to God with care, seriousness, and reverence. Whether in our worship, the way we manage spiritual gifts, or how we fulfill our commitments to Him, we must always strive to do things according to God's will, not according to our own conveniences. Uzzah's story reminds us that honoring God is not just a duty, but an essential attitude to live in His presence and experience His blessings fully. Now share in the comments if you already knew Uzzah's story in the Bible, and share this video with others. If you are not yet subscribed to our channel, subscribe now to receive exclusive content.